So in this way, so everybody can see me. Hello everybody, my name is Jian Wang, the founder and CEO of Enotes. So today I'm going to talk about private keys in blockchain. And I'm going to talk about to exchange your private key instead of use it. So, works? No, not really. Sorry. So, what is private key? In common sense, the private key represents identities. Yep. The identities of person, identity of machine, identity of organizations, or all the kinds of entities. For example, you have to prove your ID to the bank so you can transfer your money. You have to prove your ID to the email provider so you can read and send emails. So the private key represents your identity. However, specifically in blockchain, the private key proves the ownership of cryptocurrency and digital assets. The blockchain is, however, trustless and decentralized. That means you are responsible for your private key. It's very critical for user because there is no other third-party entities can help you to recover your private key. That's not possible unless they know your private key, which is not common in blockchain. So let's talk about the problems in blockchains. I'm talking about Bitcoin, but those issues existing also in all other blockchains, more or less. So first, let's look some facts on the transaction fee and confirmation time. This chart shows the transaction fee of Bitcoin for a period of 6 months. And you can see it reaches almost $40 per transaction at the end of last year and the beginning of this year for a single transaction. Remember, there's only less than 10 transactions per second possible in Bitcoin network. That means, so as the waiting queue is longer, the transaction fee rises accordingly. In this chart, we see the average confirmation time for transactions. As we all know, Bitcoin had a block time of 10 minutes, aka 600 seconds. And you have to wait 6 blocks, aka 3,600 seconds to confirm your transaction. In very rare case, as shown in this graphic, you have to wait over 10,000 seconds before a transaction is confirmed. It's terrible, isn't it? So let's talk about the traceability and actually the identity on the blockchains. We all know the blockchain is anonymous, but it's not confidential. The blockchain is also called public ledger earlier. That means every transaction is accessible to everybody. It's the core of the protocol. You cannot change it. Although you don't know the person behind this specific address, but it's possible to analyze the behavior behind this specific address and figure it out who that person is. So we cannot find Satoshi. Why? Because he had never used his Bitcoin or her Bitcoin. If he is the guy who buy the pizza with the Bitcoin will definitely know who he is or who she is, right? So the third problem is the acceptance. I've mentioned the transaction fee, I've mentioned the confirmation time. Yeah, that is the characteristic of blockchain. Yeah? But there are also a huge problem of handling blockchain, handling the private keys in blockchain. That is too complicated for average person. And how private key looks like, and how would you represent it in a way that the developers do, so like this, or in a way that's described in BIP 39, the numeric word, typically. So how would you represent your Bitcoin? I can recall at the time I was doing mobile payment, and I talked to a sheikh. The sheikh asked me, how can I tell the other people I'm rich? I cannot make it through we all pay with a cell phone. I cannot represent myself. I'm rich. So how can I tell the people I'm rich? With such numeric code? No, no. Last but not least, in fact, the most important thing is the security. Yeah? Let's take a look at so-called professionals who owns the most cryptocurrency, the exchanges. Here are the list of events that the exchange is hacked, documented, not to mention the undocumented hacks, not to mention the normal guys like you and me, the unprofessionals. How can we handling the private key properly? There are more than 980,000 Bitcoins stolen from exchanges, and a value more than $15 billion. Imagine that. They are professionals. They are dealing with Bitcoin, they are dealing with blockchain, but they are still losing their money. So it's clear for me, at least for me, my point of view, the main problem is handling of private key. The Mr. Nakamoto said, for great privacy, it's best to use Bitcoin address only once. So please raise your hand if you 100% follow the guideline of Satoshi. Anybody here? Anybody? Oh, you use a Bitcoin address only once. So HD wallet, yeah, okay, super. I think you are the 1%. So, good, very good. So, I want to also quote from Professor Diffie, he stand here tomorrow, this morning. That is what exactly the design principle of our product. Having instead of knowing. You'll be familiar with the security dongles or the debit cards. Those hardware contains private keys, but you don't know it. You never know the private key in your USB dongle or your debit cards. You just have it. Yep. And in blockchain world, it's slightly different to the centralized world. You don't have a chance to authenticate yourself to a bank or to a government to prove your identity and recover your lost money or assets. So you have to know your private key. You have a cold wallet. What is the first thing the software asks you to do to back up your private key? Yeah, you know your private key. That's the problem. You know your private key, and you use it. You will make mistake, and hackers will use it. Yeah. So, The idea of the product is change ownership of the private key is the change ownership of the digital assets. What happens when I don't know my private key? I just exchange, or let me say, you just spend your private key. How your private key looks like? It may look like this. It may look like this. This is a private key, and you spend it. The solution to ensure the security of private key, we choose the high-end security chip from NXP. This chip has been qualified for the highest security standard, Common Criterion EAL6+. There's only 2 devices at 7 at the top level. Only 2 devices. So it guarantees nobody has the access of a private key. No chance. This private key is generated in this chip, stored in this chip, and it's calculate the signature in this chip. That means plain text in, cipher text out. In the whole life cycle of this hardware or this chip, the private key never left this chip. The other challenge would be the counterfeit detection. How can I detect the private key and public keys match on the chip and without actually doing a signed signature or signed transaction? Okay, this is our patent. Okay, and furthermore, how could it be used offline? Offline. So our Chinese name of this whole project has the name of offline. No? It's simply in Chinese, offline. How could you do that? If you pre-cached the address and its balance from blockchain, you can use it offline. Let us say the data is 5 months ago. However, if you have this hardware and check the status of the private key, you see the private key is never used. So the balance on this certain address can only be increased but not be decreased. Why? Because the private key were never used. So you can use it offline. Yeah. And we support all the major cryptocurrency. Do not be confused. The consensus mechanisms is nothing to do with the private key, because the private key, there is nothing better as the ECC or the ECDSA. So they all use ECDSA, regardless of chain and consensus mechanisms they are using. So we support the most major cryptocurrency. And we support DevC, so this hardware will be quite easy to use. I will show you in a live demo. The typical workflow of a verification, as mentioned above, the blockchain network is necessary. It just have to be partly cached, and you can use it offline. The challenge response method help to verify corresponding private keys that match the public key and to prove that this private key is really in this chip. Yeah? And if you get balance from the blockchain network, hopes you got a proved coin or proved private key or proved digital assets. Before I do the demo, I want to talk about this slogan. I don't know who said that, but physical access is a total access. It's for me the golden rule for cybersecurity. It's very interesting to look at it in 2 perspectives. The first one, there's no cyber attack possible if you do not have a physical access to this coin. The second perspective is if you already have the physical access to this coin, you do have the private key. Why you are attacking it? So I'm going to give you guys a live demo. I will try to get a little visible here. So you can see my screen. And you can see my coin. I tap this coin under my phone and start the Enotes application. Oops. Oh, it's not refreshed to the big screen. Need some time? Wait a minute. Yeah. You know it in slow motion, sorry. It's the network delay. So you see it. You have checked out the public key address of this coin. You have verified the corresponding private key is in this coin. You have get the balance at this moment, real time from blockchain network. And hoopla, I have 100 milli BTCs in my hand. And I can give it to anybody, just like I'm using a cash, a dollar. Imagine that. And I can actually also, slow motion, yeah. I don't know, I have, when I click on withdraw, you see it? Slow motion. Oh, if I'm filling an address here, you can take the coin out, the Bitcoin, just withdraw to any address you want, It's quite simple, easy to use, right? So let us check back to the presentation. Where can you use it? As a gift. I can recall a story. I don't know if the story is real. So the student gives his girlfriend 100 Bitcoin at a very early stage. It's of the BIP 39 based. So what's the reaction of the girlfriend? You are kidding me? Imagine that if the student has such coin and give it to his girlfriend, what happens then? The child is 5 years old. Okay, gift. The other scenario will be face-to-face trade. I may not have internet connections, or I prefer to do it face-to-face. Now, as collections, this coin is made of precious metal, silver, gold, if you are requesting gold. Silver is the standard. So it also, for collection, possible. And deposit, for example, exchange, release such coin. You just download the application, scan it, hoopla, you are now official user of such an exchange with balance. And we have channels, direct sales, and exchange and mining pool. And back to the question or the problem we're having by blockchain. So may I ask, what is the transaction fee if I'm giving it to you? 0. What about the waiting time, the confirmation time? Well, maybe with application, 1 second. Okay? So, is that traceable? Is there any transaction on the blockchain that you can see? No. Absolutely traceable. So thank you, everybody. We have a booth outside there. If you want to have a closer look to our product, you're very welcome, and do not be hesitated to ask any question. Thank you.